Welcome to Political Scope. I'm your host, Romal Rupnarain, and on this program, we will be focusing on improving the electricity service in Berbice. My guests today are no other than Prime Minister Samuel Hines, who has responsibility for the electricity sector, Chairman of the GPL Board, Mr. Winston Brassington, and CEO of GPL, Mr. Barrett Dindial. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you, Romel.
Welcome.
PM, let's start off with you. We're focusing obviously specifically on Berbice. Could you give us a general overview? Obviously, coming through the years 1992 to where we are now, what was it like in Berbice, and how has the sector really evolved in regions 5 and 6?
Well, thank you very much, Romel. I'm glad for this opportunity to speak directly to our fellow citizens in Berbice, to reassure them that we pay no less attention to Berbice as we do to other parts of the GPL network. Indeed, New Amsterdam, Berbice had, going back a bit, it had a separate company in up to 1980, and then it was merged into GC of the day. And one of the issues as we came in was the weak connection between Demerara and Berbice, so that they could not support each other. Over the years, at different periods, generation was better in Berbice and better in Georgetown. But more recently, in particular, this year with the coming to an end of the transmission of grid program, we have put in a very strong link. So now we have a great interconnection between Demerara and Berbice, and this has enabled us to transfer power between the Demerara side and the Berbice side, quite a lot of power to meet needs and to utilize equipment that is available. I would say, though, the particular thing in our period is the extension of electrification into the Berbice area, perhaps for a number of reasons. The electrification program in the 70s, particularly with our country being short of money and in economic difficulties, and maybe also, some would claim, political considerations, a lot of areas in Berbice were not yet connected up to the grid. And you would recall our unserved area electrification program, which ensured that all the areas, all the villages that were not on, we brought them on in that program from about 2004 to 2009. I think that's the big achievement over this period of time, to have increased the coverage of residents so that essentially everyone has power. I remember the regional chairman at the time, Mr. Rohit Prasad, often telling me that his mother at her place at Kilturn keeps asking him, "Comrade, when will you all bring me electricity?" And happily we brought electricity there before she passed away. That was one of our big achievements. And generally we have been working to improve the availability, the reliability of electricity across the system. Berbice has not been overlooked at all. We focused on improving the generation at Canefield at some time. With the limitations in monies available, we opted some time ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, for rehabilitating two Morley's engines there. They served for a while. They did not maybe give us all that we hope. And this, I know, is one of the issues we're facing about replacing them in the near period, replacing them with new units in the near period. So we are paying attention to Berbice, and Berbice has seen improvement over the period that I have been responsible for electricity. Of course, in our country, quite properly, our people's expectations are right up there with maybe what is experienced in other countries that are more prosperous at the moment, and I can understand that. I'd like to assure them that we're doing the very best that we could, and in our circumstances, we've had improvements. We're still not up to see where maybe the U.S. or Europe is, but we'll keep working at it. All together, we have to keep working at it.
Picking up from what the PM just said, Mr. Brassington, we tend to have, for someone who's not too familiar with the electricity sector, the moment you probably have challenges on the grid and you have power outages, people tend to think, and obviously there will be elements who will try to exploit that and try to give Barbicians the impression that they are being neglected or the sector is being neglected in that region. But obviously that is not the case. GPL has embarked on several initiatives to not just expand but improve electricity in Berbice.
Indeed, we have. Let me first of all say that I'm pleased that we're focusing on electricity supply in Berbice. Too often we look just at the overall system. We don't focus on Berbice. Let me say, as a company, we have been looking at Berbice and seeking to improve the service for a number of years now. Let me recognize that we are not where we want to be.
Exactly.
We have challenges. But I think as we look back at 2014, our most significant achievement was linking Berbice with Demerara.
Indeed.
We now have an interconnected grid, something that we've spoken about for a very long time. We now have an interconnected grid between Berbice and Demerara. And so power can be transmitted and is being transmitted at a significant level all the way from Georgetown all the way to Berbice. So we are now tied there. When the transmission line goes down and Berbicians get blocked out, we feel it in Georgetown too. So we're tied at the hip. But let me say that whilst we recognize we need to improve, substantial investments have been made over the years. I recall Gaisuco in 2006 bringing their plant online. A few years later, we completed a transmission link between Skeldon and 53. So we now had a transmission line at 69 kV all the way from Skeldon coming down. And then we rehabilitated the Merle sets at Canefield. And so these improvements sought to, one, improve the generating capacity in Berbice. Two, improve the transmission system. So we had a more integrated transmission system in Berbice. And the link that I mentioned last year was the final part of that. Over the years, too, we've made substantial investments in expanding our service. We have expanded the number of customers that we have in Berbice by building out the unserved areas. Today we have over 30,000 customers in Berbice alone. At GPL we have over 175,000, but Berbice accounts for over 30,000 customers. We've also been trying to improve our customer service. So when you have an outage or you have a fault or a problem, you can pick up the phone and call our call center and get service. Someone will tell you this is what is happening, or we'll respond to your fault as quickly as possible. And typically they need to fix that within 24 hours. So let me say that we've made substantial investments. The service is improving but expanding, but we also have our challenges. We're all upset when you have power outages, and we need to reduce that. But I think with the link with Georgetown, with Demerara, and I think with our continued investments, that I expect 2015 to be a better year than 2014.
Thank you very much. Picking up from Mr. Brassington, Mr. Dindial, obviously we know for a fact 30,000 consumers. We're talking about roughly 30,000 families in Berbice, and that in itself is significant. I'm sure that figure has grown rapidly over the past few years. You obviously are the point man dealing with this very dynamic sector. You have to, deal with the various issues. Now, specifically in Berbice, we're talking about the interconnectivity now. A few years back, that was not possible. Now I'm being told because of this new system that we have the linking the entire grid, that Georgetown is providing power as well to Berbice. And previously, if you had that shortfall, obviously the situation would have been more difficult for consumers there.
Well, certainly. I just want to walk back a bit though, because my involvement in the Berbice system actually dates back to 1988, when I was transferred to the Canefield Control Center. Those days I was a trainee engineer, and I was attached there as the operations engineer for a period of time. Of course, in those days, you had the Canefield Power Station with two Merlise engines. That was the mainstay of the Berbice system, with some limited support from operations at Everton, and of course some assistance from Anvoac. You had these two long transmission lines from Canefield to 53 Village, and of course from Canefield to Anvoac. You had serious operational issues, especially during the long dry season. The transmission lines would not stay in service. They used to keep tripping constantly. You had a heavy contamination, salt contamination. And you used to be washing insulators repeatedly, day after day. The lines would stay in for half a day and they would go out. You had very long feeders, and of course it was extremely, extremely frustrating operating the system. But there was nothing else you could have done, obviously. From then to where we are now, we've come leaps and bounds. We have done some investment at the Canefield Power Station, of course, with the commissioning of the Skelton facility in 2009, starting with the wort cellars and of course the cogen plant later. Our expectation was that we would have largely been able to stabilize the generation situation in Berbice, but we know there are challenges and there continue to be challenges. But compounding the generation problem obviously was the poor performance of our transmission lines in Berbice and our distribution feeders. In fact, in 2013, we had a total of about 78 transmission line trips on the two lines between Canefield and Anvoac and Canefield and 53. And this got worse, much worse last year, increasing to 208. We did quite a bit of work on our distribution front last year, and of course, we saw the benefits of that. Our distribution trips actually reduced from 178 in 2013 to just 67 last year. We know what are the source of our problems in Berbice, what are causing these outages, and of course, in 2015 there's a comprehensive overhaul program for both of the old transmission lines in Berbice, from Canefield to 53 Village and from Canefield to Anvoac. These transmission lines, as folks in Berbice would know, traverse the backlands, so they're some very difficult areas. And although we have people dedicated to keep a constant look on these lines and, of course, initiate maintenance activity, we're not getting the level of performance as we expect. So in 2015, we're bringing some new strategies to try to resolve this issue once and for all, the availability and performance of these lines. But despite all the trips, the level of supply in Berbice has remained kind of constant between 2013 and 14. We have actually delivered 97.5% of the total energy required of us.
Okay.
So the outages actually account for just 2.5% of the energy that we, was required, but we didn't supply. So the situation overall might look dire, but of course, it is not as bad as it might appear to be when you look at the statistics. But like the chairman said, there is still work to be done, and quite a bit of work to be done. We know there are things that we have to do to further reinforce the transmission link that was commissioned on July 30th last year. And like the chairman said, we are moving quite a bit of power into the Berbice system, and I'm happy to say on December 15th, actually, we moved the 12.5 megawatts from Demerara into the Berbice system. And if this power wasn't available into the Berbice system, obviously we would have had serious problems.
Yes.
So, yes, the linking of the Demerara and the Berbice system means that if there are problems in Demerara, it's reflected also in Berbice. And if there are problems in Berbice, it does affect Berbice. We know what these problems are. Like I said, we now have to bring these new strategies which we have developed to try to improve the reliability of the system.
Thank you very much. PM, I mean, I think you three gentlemen, I personally would know that electricity is a source of empowerment for our people. Having lived through periods where you live in communities that were not served with electricity, and thankfully, under the Unserved Electrification Program, that community benefited. You see the transformation right before your eyes. Obviously having recognized this, your government continues to work and place a lot of emphasis in the sector, notwithstanding the challenges, the main one being finance. But based on what we are hearing and based on what we're seeing, obviously, Berbice, we in a not too distant future, we will begin to see the benefits of all these investments, bearing in mind that it was never going to be a smooth process.
Yeah. Yes. The provision of electricity takes quite a bit of money all the while, in the generation side, the transmission side, and let me speak to the people side too. Our employees and our customers need also to raise their own levels of behavior. If I speak to an issue which I have found embarrassing, particularly in dealing with other countries, is our high losses. And more recently, working with the consultants from abroad and so on, GPL was able to advance to the point of determining losses, estimating losses on various feeders. So now we can distribute losses in various areas. We can assign various geographical areas at losses. And there are highs and lows. And I would say Berbice is in the middle region there too itself, good places and bad places. I would like to encourage all our people, and let me say about 80% of our accounts, maybe we could say have no problems, but maybe 20%, 20-25% of our accounts have problems. I would like to encourage the 80% to stay committed, to paying what is required, and the other, and to exert all the social pressures they can to the others to come right to. I know that there are many reasons why countries like ours are at the point they are, with high losses, particularly high non-technical commercial losses. Our history of people feeling they've been victims and so on, and maybe the feelings that government, that certain basic services like water and electricity in particular should be provided more or less at no charge, or whatever people can afford after they have attended to the other things they need. That kind of history has maybe created a disposition to make people vulnerable to try to avoid or reduce the amount of electricity they need to pay. And then let me say this goes across all levels, across all of the differences you might think exist in our country, from the high to the low, and east to west, north to south, and so on. And this is something that I would like to bring to attention. And here too, I would say that our cost that we charge is within the region for a situation like us in the Caribbean area. I've been speaking from time to time that it was a good thing that the president of the Caribbean Development Bank came and spoke to the issue here earlier in 2014 and pointed out that typically utilizing petroleum products with the prices at the time up to last year, electricity costs are 30 cents US to 40 cents US per kilowatt hour, $60 Ghana to $80 a Ghana per kilowatt hour. We probably, our total all-up cost, if we were a commercial operation, say, would probably be in the order of $85 a kilowatt hour on the average, but we're charging maybe about $65. So there is a significant subsidy from the government into our electricity prices. So I'd like to encourage people to change their views that the prices are much what could be expected in our situation in Guyana, basing our electricity on petroleum, utilizing petroleum. In terms of the efficiency of conversions, kilowatt hours of electricity from, say, gallons of fuel, we're doing quite well. We're making the specification of the equipment manufacturers. We're on target there. So that people can be satisfied with that part of it. So I'd like to encourage our people to not yield to any temptations, and also to put social pressures on the others so that we could be like Barbados. I want us to even be better than Barbados. Barbados has a figure down of I think 6, 7, 8% total losses, of which maybe 2 or 3% is non-commercial, non-technical commercial losses versus maybe 17% in our situation. So that's one of the things I want to work towards.
Apart from the fact that, which is a very important point, that everyone has a role to play in developing the electricity sector. You mentioned consumers, which is very important, but what we have also seen and what has been distressing for quite a number of stakeholders, not just in the electricity sector, but Guyanese as a whole, because they're affected, GPL consumers, is that knowing the challenge that this sector faces, knowing the uphill battle of those involved in the sector, it is not, or the road towards improving the electricity sector, and let's say we're talking specifically in Berbice here, for the people in Berbice, it has not been made easy, but rather more difficult by an uncooperative, what I would say an uncooperative political opposition. Because if we were to go back to, let's say, 2013, the political opposition cut around $5 billion in targeted assistance to the sector to achieve some of the very things that we're talking about here, to improve the service to citizens. Had it not been for, various factors, the president's intervention, the government taking the issue of the budget cuts to the high courts, probably we would have been discussing an entirely different issue, because consumers were faced with a prospect with $5 billion cut in the budget. They were faced with about a 22% increase in their electricity rates, and obviously I would assume that this is very disconcerting, especially when you already have your plan in place and you're working towards your targets.
Yes. In 2013, when we had the $5 billion cut in our capital budget, it delayed a lot of our investments. It placed a great deal of uncertainty on how do we plan going forward, because being entirely dependent on government to fund our capital program without certainty of when those funds would be available, we could not go out and do a lot of what we planned to do. And in Berbice, we have to do a number of things in Berbice. One, we have to continue to invest to improve our network, to improve our generation. Two, we need to improve our operational efficiency. But those two are interconnected. If you don't have money to buy transformers, to have spares, if you don't have money to basically go out and build new distribution networks or replace old ones, or you have to delay plans to, you know, make investments in improving your transmission network, these things have knock-on effects. It increases the risk of blockouts. It delays people getting connected to the grid because we don't have the meters, or we don't have the material to connect them to the grid. So indeed, not having a predictable financing plan in terms of what we can get from the Parliament has created limitations and problems for us. Let me step back and say that there has been investment at various levels. Generation, we spoke of Gaisuko, we spoke of Cape Field. Transmission, the Skeldon 53 link, now the transmission network connecting on Verac, which allows power to go to Berbice. This year we're planning, with the help from the IDB and the European Union, to have a massive rebuild of our distribution network and to introduce smart meters. So we have to continually invest. And I would say that the key drivers of improved performance at GPL, one, it's investment. Two, it's also improving our operational performance, which is affected by our management capability and our own people. But thirdly, it's also the way consumers look at GPL, and the PM spoke to this. We have to improve the culture of people paying for electricity supply and not stealing. I think we will get better, and we want to get better quickly. But this is subject to how much we invest, how much our own people, our management, our employees can improve their operational performance, and thirdly, how our consumers treat us by respecting the rules, by paying the bills, by not stealing, and by discouraging others to steal.
Thank you. Mr. Brassington, he touched on one aspect. Obviously, you're a professional in the sector, but we cannot escape from the fact that bearing or taking into consideration everything that both Prime Minister Hines, Mr. Brassington, and even you yourself have spoken about the many efforts that you have not only taken in terms of improving service to citizens, but you're also improving your responsiveness, your education, trying to educate Guyanese about the challenges. It must be difficult, and it must seem that you're taking, for every step you take, you're taking 2 steps backward when you have the political opposition that is bent on misinforming people. Because I could recall there was talk in the media that the opposition, they were invited to talks before the budget cuts, or I think sometime around that period. They were briefed on all the various plans that GPL has. There was no effort to really criticize, safe to say, generic statements, trying to give citizens the impression that we are basically lost for ideas in the electricity sector. And when you start to create that, obviously, I'm sure it would have a negative impact on not just the morale of the GPL, the entire GPL staff and so forth, but your plans that you're putting in place now, and future plans.
Well, I think I want to focus on the positives. In 1997, we actually embarked on an electrification program in Berbice, funded with resources from government and the Japanese government, and we actually provided electricity for the first time to some communities in Kanchi, East Kanchi. I remember a big sermon in Gangaram and some other communities in East Kanchi. We actually put in electricity from Skellen into Crabwood Creek. And I remember going and meeting the residents there and informing them that we were going to now provide electricity, and they were laughing at me, and very few people turned up at the meeting. I remember Mr. Bates being there, and he said, I'm going to talk to them. I don't believe you because I've heard this story and these promises before, and I don't think it's going to happen. It did happen. And in fact, when we got electricity into the back of Crabwood Creek, people were now coming out in numbers coming to want to meet us. And we said, well, the project is now at an end. You know, we are coming close to 99. GPL was going to be on the scene. You know, our role had finished and we needed to move on. And so it was bittersweet for me and the staff at GPL. It was very fulfilling and, you know, heartwarming to see the happiness that people felt having a great connection now. In 2004, Prime Minister mentioned, we started the Unserved Areas program. And in phase 1 of the Unserved program, we actually did 28 communities in Region 6 alone. In phase 2 of that program, we actually did another 7. But under the UAP, there were specific benchmarks that communities had to meet before they could have been listed. And the return on the investment had to meet a certain benchmark. And so there are a number of big communities in Region 6 that could not meet that benchmark. And so government stepped in with their own resources. And we created the additional Unserved Areas program. And that's how we went into sections of Blackbush Pole and East Berbice and some other communities that could not have made the UAP list. In some instances, like in Blackbush Pole, it was over $200,000 for infrastructure for one customer, which was funded by government. And of course, we completed those. Between the government-funded project and the UAP, we actually provided infrastructure for over 20,000 new customers. And this is out of a total national, total of 50,000. So it's quite a bit of work has gone into Region 6. I want to say that despite that all is happening on the political scene, there's continued efforts in Region 6. We're working with the Ministry of Housing. We're working with private developers and providing electricity to a number of other housing schemes as I speak. In fact, Prime Minister might speak to Angais Avenue that we managed to complete in December.
I heard
and this is the government resources. So despite all of this happening and the constraints and the unpredictability of inflows, we're still doing work and we're still keeping our momentum going. So people, you know, I'm sure they're not losing hope. We saw what happened recently in Legua and Wakanan. It just divert a bit. So things are happening.
Great. As we come closer and closer
I
down
thought
to...
I thought I'd just state again there areas, Blackbush Polder, where we put in more than $200,000 per household, the cost of connecting. And as I mentioned earlier on the IDB program, assistant program, the cutoff was $200,000 per household. And that's a significant sum. Particularly if you think of 100 households by $200,000 or 1,000 households, you're already into $200 million and so on. Those are significant sums that the government has supported electrification in various places all around the country, all across the country, not only in Berbice, but Berbice has had no less than its proportional share in our attention and in our expenses, our expenditures. I thought I should emphasize that again. Particularly, that was a problem in the more rural areas. I know there's still one or two persons who I would say even in my old village of Huntley, which is in my Coney area, I know some people who wanted to get, or the house wanted to get electricity, and they're way down the dam going to the coast, the corridor areas there going to the coast. And it was quite a big sum it couldn't qualify in the IDB program.
You're obviously working with constraints, but
yes.
It is significant that despite those constraints, you've managed to achieve so much, especially, let's say, for an area like Blackbush Polder.
97% or so, as Mr. CEO has been saying, we've been able to cover in that order of households, like 97%. And of course, now we have the situation where from the time the original lists were made up and studied, maybe by 2000, in almost every area now there is another street beyond where the streets were before. And so they keep coming, and I think we have to contemplate another mini UAP to pick up these additional streets all across the coast, all across the country. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure that'd be good news.
Well,
and
we have
let's
to
say specifically in
contemplate it. We
Berbice.
have to have the money.
Yes,
The
obviously.
money has to be had,
Everything has to fall
budget.
into place.
and so on. Yes.
Yeah, well, these things are not,
We may speak to,
overnight.
I think, with the question of, take the opportunity to speak to the issue of street lighting. GPL only gets income from the bills it pays people. And street lighting couldn't be paid for by GPL, or otherwise the bills will go up. And if GPL became responsible for street lighting in any place, any one place, the law would require that it become responsible for street lighting all across its network. So GPL is not responsible for street lighting. It is the local government organization, mayor and city councils, NDCs, and with the main roads that are owned by the central government, the Ministry of Public Works and Communication is responsible for street lighting, the road lighting, both the capital costs and the monthly running costs for the electricity utilized. We need to speak to that. We've had many instances where people have put on lights unofficially, hook up lights to the network, and GPL has, I would say, been forced to get into a program of determining whether persons would take responsibility for it, and if they would, we have made policy changes to accommodate. So if people in a particular street would take the responsibility for the electricity, and once the neighborhood council is approving of it, then they can have the street lighting. If not, if no one will take responsibility, then GPL is perforce have to take it down, because GPL is under strict kind of rules, laws, that it has to be uniform. It has to treat every area and every place much the same way. So we have to be concerned about that. So that is the issue of street lighting. I would like again to encourage people to think that if you really need street lights, you should not maybe hesitate to join together and make a legal commitment to satisfy the requirements to have lights in your
Because
in
it
your
is
street.
being done by citizens.
You can have lights in your streets. I know it's a matter of thinking. When I first went up to the Canada and heard about some places in North America where the owner of the house is responsible for the cleaning the snow on the sidewalk alongside him. And if anyone walks along the sidewalk and it hasn't been cleaned and they slip and break their leg, then you, as the owner of that lot, is liable. I found that very strange almost to reject, but it depends on what arrangements are made. So I would encourage people who want electricity and want to be their streets lit to, once they take the responsibility, and it's not that much. I think we have been working with determine new lighting arrangements that might reduce the cost per lamp from, say, $3,000 a month for the electricity burnt to maybe $2,000 per month.
That's good news.
LED,
Because
maybe
we have such an
moving
arrangement.
from the older lamps to the new LED lamps. One may be able, of course, the LED lamp installation would be a little bit more costly,
Yes.
but the monthly charges could be down to $2,000 per lamp per month.
Excellent.
So,
Yeah, if you have
we can
4
talk to
residents
that.
in an area, 4 families,
yes,
and they join together, they could do that.
but they have to make a commitment like a customer,
Yes.
like a legal customer. Yeah.
Right. So the amendments to ESRA in 2010 that were enacted into law allow you now, with an objection letter from the lighting authority, which is the NDC or the town council or city council, to come to GPA and contract for street lighting service. And you get a bill just like your electricity bill for your home, and you pay. But like Prime Minister said, we prefer these to be energy efficient lamps, so that your monthly charge is manageable. We have over 6,000 lamps installed privately around our network. Accruing charges of over 330 million a year that nobody's paying.
Right.
And there's a growing population of lamps we call illegal lamps.
Yeah, adding to the challenges.
Yes.
Well, just a reminder, our program here is Political Scope, and we're looking at the electricity sector in Berbice. Our guests on the program are no other than Prime Minister Samuel Hines, Chairman of the GPL Board, Mr. Winston Brassington, and CEO of GPL, Mr. Barrett Dindial. Unfortunately, we have come to the close of our program, so we will wrap up, but I would like to wrap up one question that I'm sure the three of you will be able to answer. It is something that I've personally been affected by it, and it is no other than our hydro project, because I've done my own studies on various hydro projects, looking at Guyana, doing research and so forth, how this will affect this country in a positive way in so many ways, in so many sectors. We're talking about employment, reduce electricity costs, and so forth. Obviously, all the projects that you have spoken to so far, and those that are still in the pipeline that will be unveiled over the coming months, years, all point to really having power generated from Amelia, and the interconnectivity obviously speaks to this. With what has been happening now, and we keep talking about generating sets and the problems that we have and so forth, you find yourself in obviously a tough situation, because on one hand you're hoping, and obviously the government is working to have Amelia set up, but then you're forced at the same time, with as long as that is delayed, you have to expend further resources, difficult to get financial resources in procuring sets and doing rehabilitation to the other sets, when Amelia would have obviously addressed this problem in a very significant way. It must be challenging.
Well, let me speak to the operational side of things. We now operate, we've come to a period actually when we had almost 35 generating sets running to meet peak demand. And this included over 20 Caterpillar sets, ranging in capacity from 1 to 1.6 megawatts. With the commissioning of the Idaho plant last year, the 26 megawatt plant, we obviously have a vast reduction in the number of units that are operating, but still we have a large fleet of engines. Each engine actually has thousands and thousands of parts, and all of these units have to work seamlessly, for us to deliver continuous service. If you were to have the hydro, we're talking about 4 large turbines with very few operating parts that have a vastly higher reliability expectation than the engines that we are running. So we're talking about new units. We're talking about 4 units delivering, total of 160 megawatts maximum, which is pushing all the power we need. Studies have been done to look to the impact of importing all of this power from one source into our grid and how the grid is going to perform. All of those things have been done. So what's going to happen essentially is you're going to have a much stronger grid. We have very reliable large machines holding the grid and keeping it stable. So right now we have one machine tripping, and we of course have on the frequency protection, which means that we have to load shed certain circuits to keep the system stable. On the hydro, we can have a vastly improved, a reliable system.
And obviously the people in Berbice, which is the focus of this program, they will be obviously the ultimate beneficiaries. And in the future, when we have this in stream, eventually, you have several other things: reduce electricity costs, obviously more reliable electricity and all the other benefits and less challenges for GPL, obviously.
That's true. So there are a number of investments that would happen between now and hydro that would serve to improve the efficiency and reliability of the transmission system and the distribution system. We are dealing now with areas with voltage problems in Region 6 in particular. We're going to be going into communities in 2015. There is a power utility upgrade program, a $65 million US program. We're going to be going into communities that have been suffering low voltage. We can actually do complete network upgrade. We can put in larger transformers. We're doing work on the primary side to improve the voltage. So there's a series of things, investment between now and hydro, to really bring the system efficiency up to some acceptable standard. So when hydro comes, really, people are expected to see the full benefits.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Brassington, not just chair of the GPL board, you have involved in the private sector, investments and so forth. This would obviously mean quite a number of things for, Guyanese. And obviously, with each passing day this project is delayed, the country continues to obviously suffer.
Yes. Amila remains probably the country's most strategic project. And where we are right now in 2015 is we are hoping that everything will be in place to see the project restart, where construction will actually start in the latter half of this year. But when we look back at where we were in 2013, this would represent almost a 2-year delay on starting the project. Then, when we had Blackstone, and then in the middle of the summer, the Parliament blocked certain things, and we didn't have unanimity, and Blackstone withdrew. We've been working continuously since that time to get this project back on track. And I think most recently you would have heard His Excellency speaking to things progressing positively. So I believe that in the latter half of this year we should be able to see the project restart with construction, but it will be 2 years late. But this project will allow us to cover all of the current GPL generation needs, at least for the Demerara Berbice system. Essequibo is not connected to the grid, but we will also add Linden. It will provide an opportunity for a lot of self-generators to come onto the grid. And I think we'll be looking at improved reliability and most of all, low cost. It will reduce our cost of generation, and it would insulate us from the risk of the volatility of the price of fuel.
Thank you very much. PM Hines, it was heartening to see or to read President Ramatara's conviction that the hydro will obviously be one of his, or continue to be his priority, in this year, next year, trying to get it, completed.
Yes. Just to look back, hydro development has been an aspiration of the Guyanese people from since maybe, I don't know, at least the 1950s, 1960s. We may recall that Dr. Jagan, I think, had picked up the possibility of developing a fall on the Demerara River there, Tiger Hill, I think, or somewhere. And then we recall in the 70s, the PNC administration of that time, Mr. Burnham, had been committed to a huge development in the Upper Mazaruni, some 3,000 megawatts, which was way beyond our grid needs at that time. We are looking at this. Amila is about the best fit to our grid. Whilst we have this hydro potential, it is mostly in the hinterland and it's far away from the coast. And the transmission issue has been always a significant issue. We also have issues of the variation in flow through the year and things like that. So we have been feeling, I have been feeling that we are at a point where Amila makes a good fit to our grid. And my estimate of the numbers involved is that when oil was at about, with oil at about $100 a barrel, crude oil, we probably are looking at generation costs in Guyana in our systems, I would say more in the order of 23, 24 cents US per kilowatt hour. But with a Myla, we are looking at initially maybe 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and after some maybe 4 or 5 years dropping down to 7 cents, and then at the end of a 20-year or boot or 25-year boot, they're going down to just about 3 cents a kilowatt hour, so that you're looking at a significant reduction in generation costs. However it flows through to the consumer, it will flow through, a lot of that will flow through to the consumer. But more than that too, as Chairman was saying, we've lost 2 years from the time we were feeling very much that we were about to close the deal and break ground. We've lost 2 years due to the blockage in Parliament. In that 2 years, I think the estimate was that we probably lost $100 million US a year in charges. That is, the coming into being of Myla is put back at least 2 years. And in that 2-year period, estimates is that we would have been cutting our costs of generation overall by about $100 million US a year. So that's a big loss that we suffered when Myla didn't go ahead in 2013 or whenever it was in Parliament there. But I've been thinking that one of the things that we need to assure ourselves as Guyanese and Berbicians too is that we can, with our work and getting better at our work individually each day and getting better at working together every day, that we could provide ourselves with a very good life here in Guyana. We say that people are most important, and that is true. People are most important, not in a sense that you bow down to them, but when you look at a place and a country, if things are good, it's the work of the people. And if you look to another country and you see things are bad, it is also a reflection on the work of the people individually and together. And I think if we can develop in ourselves this assurance that with our efforts on our application, our work individually and all together, and getting better every day, we could provide ourselves a prosperous life here in Guyana. And that's what I would like to assure more of my citizens in Berbice. That's the approach that we take in GPL. I think that's the approach that the whole government takes for our people in Berbice and our people across all Guyana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hines, and that's a good note to close on. Just a reminder, you were watching Political Scope, and we were focusing on the electricity sector in Berbice. My guests in this program were Prime Minister Samuel Hines, Chairman of the Board of GPL, Mr. Winston Brassington, and CEO of GPL, Mr. Baron Dindial. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being on the program. I'm your host, Romel Rupnarain. Thank you and goodbye.